Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a custom set of Magic the Gathering cards themed around the characters, items, and events from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. For those of you who don't know, this is just one small video in a giant series where I'm taking every single MCU movie and turning it into a Magic the Gathering set. When you combine all these little parts together, you get a humongous set called Magic the Marveling, and it's a really fun experience. So if you want to see every single Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 card, you can click the link below. I won't be able to talk about all of the little cards, but I'll talk about the most important ones. And then there'll also be a link where you can check out the entire website for Magic the Marveling, where you can check out all the other movies and just see a full list of all of the cards and their most updated forms, because sometimes I look back and I'm like, well, this isn't very, flavorful, and sometimes I had little tiny interactions later on that work with future cards, and so it's always good to check back and see what's new. Either way, there are a lot, you don't need to have seen the other videos before moving into this one, but there are a couple things you do need to know. First off, in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, the Guardians were put in the colors of white, red, and green, which is a slight deviation from the normal colors, because normally green is not in hero colors, but you'll notice going forward that green is introduced a lot more, as it just makes a lot of sense. On top of that, to save space on the type line, the Avenger and Hero and Villain creature type have moved. Instead of it saying Legendary Creature Hero, it will now just say Legendary Hero, and just know that those are creatures with the Hero subtype. And if you see one that says Legendary Avenger, which you won't in this movie, it'll say Legendary Avenger, and that's both a Hero and an Avenger. But Avenger cards are only given to cards in Avengers movie, so Iron Man in Iron Man 3 is not considered an Avenger, but that's not super relevant to this movie. There's not much else we're going to talk about that you need to know. There may be little interactions, and I may talk about them when I go into cards in particular, but why don't we start this off? Starting off, let's talk about Peter Quill Celestial. He's a 4-cost, green, blue, red, legendary hero Celestial Guardian 4/4, and he gets +1/+1 for each counter on a land you control. And then as long as you control a land with a counter on it, if Peter Quill would die or be put into exile, you may instead remove a counter from a land you control. And then you can pay 3 and sacrifice a token artifact, and as long as you control no lands with counters on them, put a power counter on target land you control with a counter on it. Now, this card has kind of a lot, and there's a lot of different things I thought about when making it. Let's first look at the mana cost. Why is it like this? Now, this Peter Quill Celestial is built to be able to fit within the Guardians deck, because I think it really needs to be able to do that. If you want to build a Guardians deck, this fits. But it also fits within something like an Ego. Ego will have, be able to use Peter Quill inside that deck. And you'll notice Peter Quill cares about counters on lands, which is not something the Guardians normally care about. They care more about about token artifacts, whether it be selling things using the sell mechanic, which I'll talk about if that shows up on a card, and scrap tokens, which are just generic artifact tokens that are there just to boost artifacts. And so they're both able to do that. And so you'll notice, the first two lines kind of care about land counters, which you'll notice Ego will too. And then the bottom part kind of cares about land counters as well, but requires token artifacts. You kind of have to use his Guardian roots in order to get his card up and running. And so while he may not be able to create token artifacts, if you combine him with Guardians, you will be able to, you'll see, there's some really interesting synergy here. So why don't we move on to Gamora, Menacing Threat. It's a 4-cost green legendary hero, Zephoberi Guardian. She's a 3/3 with trample, and whenever an artifact leaves your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then you can pay 2 and sacrifice an artifact to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So this one, again, doesn't specifically generate artifacts, but it will allow you, like, say you sacrifice an artifact with Peter Quill to put a counter on a land, you'll be able to put a counter on her, and she'll also be able to destroy artifacts by herself as a kind of like a nice tool for the Guardians deck to use. When I think build these decks, there are very clear themes. For instance, there's obviously going to be a deck that you could build with Guardians, and they're all going to kind of work well together because they all have different themes. Like Peter Quill, or like someone like Iron Man, he clearly has themes that go through all of his different variations. So just note, these are not the only version of these characters. There's also versions from the first movie, and there'll be versions in Infinity War. So if this isn't like, oh, you want this to be better, there are other versions of Gamora. Next we have Drax, Reckless Warrior. It's a 2-cost red and green legendary hero guardian, 6/2, and it says he must attack each combat if able. He normally doesn't think before he attacks, so I think this makes a lot of sense. And it's also, it's a theme with his card. And then whenever he deals combat damage to a player, create a scrap token. So scrap tokens are, colorless artifacts tokens, and that's all they are. And then you can tap and sacrifice an artifact, and he fights target creature. So again, we're seeing this guy, he's our first ability to create artifacts with this new set. And because he's a 6/2, there's a high chance that they don't want to block, so you may be able to get that in and create a scrap token. And he also can work as nice removal by allowing you to sack artifacts like the scrap token he creates when he hits a player. The issue is, he has to attack each combat if able, so you really can't leave that open for instant speed interaction unless you can give him something like Vigilance. So I think it creates this interesting dynamic where you can kind of tame his anger so he doesn't attack by tapping him and sacrificing an artifact. So I think all of his mechanics work really well together. Next, we have Baby Groot. It's X green green for Legendary Hero Guardian 0/0, and it enters the battlefield with the X +1/+1 counters on it. And then you can pay green and tap, and target Guardian gets +X+0, where X is the number of counters on Baby Groot. You may sacrifice 4 artifacts if you do untap it. So, what's going to happen here is you're going to play him, maybe, if you have 6 mana, he comes in as a 4/4, and he'll be able to pay a green and give a Guardian +4 attack. But if you manage to sack 4 artifacts, which, you'll be able to create artifacts in this kind of deck because a lot of cards care about it, you'll be able to do that again and essentially give them +8/+0 for 2 mana and sacrificing 4 artifacts. And sacrificing 4 artifacts is a steep cost, but I wanted to make sure this ability couldn't be easily abused. Remember, this also works with treasure tokens, so any deck that can generate a ton of treasures. I'm trying to also think about this outside of the limited kind of environment that I'm creating here. Obviously, there are so many cards in Magic. I'm sure this goes infinite with something, but, I think it's a fair and balanced card. Next, we have Rocket Weapon Master. It's a 4-cost red and green legendary hero half-worlder guardian, 3/3 with trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand or create a scrap token. So here, he doesn't really care about your artifacts on the battlefield, but he will allow you to either get an artifact back that you lost or create a scrap token, and because he has trample, there's a high chance that he's actually going to get through, at least in the early game. And so if you don't have anything to return from your graveyard, or you just don't want to pay the mana and need an artifact now, you can have him create a scrap token. But if there's an important artifact that maybe you sacrificed earlier with Gamora to destroy someone's enchantment, he can get that back. So a very good utility card. Next, we have Ego the Living Planet. So this is 3 black, green, blue. Also a slight deviation for villains. Villains generally don't get green, but saying that he's a celestial bound to a planet, that feels pretty green, so I included it. He's a legendary villain celestial, and he says when he enters the battlefield, put a power counter at target land you control. So Peter Quill would get +1/+1 for this. And as long as you control land with power counter on it, he has indestructible and death touch. Obviously, he gets his power from the planet. When the planet is destroyed, he loses all of his power, and so he loses his ability to be indestructible and be able to kill things really easily. I mean, he's a 6/6, he can still kill things pretty easily when the land is either destroyed or the power counter goes away. And whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Ego fight target creature and you may draw a card. So this is a pretty insane card, and looking at it, I could probably nerf his stats. He could probably be a 4/4, and this card would still be really good. Maybe maybe I make it so when the power counter on the land goes away, he dies. I think this card may need a nerfing, but I think it's slightly balanced. 6 mana is a lot, and looking at this in Commander, it would be a very good card, but I don't know if it would be game breaking. That would have to be decided. It would be hard to tell without playing this set once it's complete. So, that will happen at the end. There'll probably be a couple videos where I talk about a bunch of big power changes I'm doing, but for now, I think this is fine. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Moving on, this also obviously fits in with Peter Quill, who can put counters on land, so you would want to put him in this deck, so it works well. Next, we have a Mantis. It's a 5-cost blue legendary creature guardian 4/4. Now, this one was a tough one. I decided to put the guardian tag on it. not a huge fan of it, especially since it costs blue, but whatever. It has hexproof, and it costs, activated abilities of Mantis cost blue less to cast if you control a Celestial. So if you have, Ego on the battlefield, or even Peter Quill, it reduces the blue by, the amount of mana it costs to activate blue abilities of her, basically. Sorry, that was a really convoluted way of saying that. It makes her activated abilities cost blue less, but this can only affect the colored mana. And then you can pay blue and tap to tap or untap target permanent you don't control. So, technically if you have 2 Mantises, she can just, and a Celestial, you can just kind of tap, 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 which might do something. But generally, this card is pretty good with that tap or untap target permanent. If it just said tap, I feel like this would... Oh, sorry, this says target permanent you don't control. Never mind, this can't go tap, tap, tap. I thought about that. So it just lets you tap down things, or if you, have a opponent that you're, teaming up with, you can untap things to help. You can also tap down their lands, which is kind of mean, but I think that it's fine for a 5 cost. The reason that it says this effect only reduces the amount of colored mana is that you can give Mantis other abilities by giving her equipment or enchantment. So I want to make sure this doesn't go infinite with anything else. So I think this was a fair thing to add. I went back and forth on whether I should add that much text to the card, but I think it's needed. There are so many cards that there's definitely something that would break. Either way, moving on, we have Nebula, Hated Sister. It's blue and a black for legendary artifact villain Lufomoid, a 5/5, and it says Nebula can't be blocked, so 5/5 for 2 that can't be blocked. There's got to be a downside here somewhere. And it says Nebula enters the battlefield tapped and does not untap during its controller's untap step. Yep, that makes sense. It had to be a downside somewhere. And whenever a creature artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, untap Nebula. And whenever Nebula deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So essentially, she can't be blocked. You're going to be dealing a ton of damage. Whenever you deal combat damage, draw a card. This would be a very powerful commander. You can kill someone in 5 turns. If you find a way to constantly move things to the graveyard, or find a way to untap her through something like a Mantis, this becomes a very powerful card. On its own, I don't know how great it is. It may need some refining, but generally black has really big creatures with downsides, and a lot of those times those downsides can be abused. The fact that this is legendary might be a little problematic in something like Commander, but I think in the limited environment it is perfectly fine. You're gonna have to have your stuff constantly dying in order to get this to work. Now, because it's Or artifact, you could theoretically throw this in the Ego and Peter Quill deck, and when Peter Quill is sacrificing artifacts, Nebula will be able to untap. But this probably has some weird infinite combo where by letting her untap and giving her ability, she can do some weird thing, but I think it's perfectly fine. Next, we have Yesha. It's a 4-cost green and white legendary creature, Sovereign Noble. Her power is equal to the number of creatures you control. You can pay 4 and create a 1/1 white and green Sovereign creature token, and you can tap and sacrifice a creature token, and Yesha deals damage to target creature equal to its power. So you'll notice here that this is very clearly supposed to be a token swarm kind of deck. Immediately she comes in as a 1/3 for 4, but if you have other creatures, this can really quickly get out of hand. She can also create the soldiers that boost her power, and she can then use those creature tokens to kill things. So this would be a perfect commander for a Selesnya deck. And you'll notice that there are other cards that care about token making within the set. For instance, Sovereign Pilot is a 2-cost white creature sovereign for 1, and it can't attack or block unless you control 3 or more tokens. So those can be, creature tokens, artifact tokens, it really doesn't matter. And then you can sacrifice a creature and it gains first strike until end of turn. So a 4/1 first striker is pretty good. This is meant to be more of kind of like a limited kind of card. Then we have Sovereign Chambermaid. It's a 6-cost green and white creature sovereign 2/2, and whenever your opponent casts a spell, you get to create a 1/1, which is a very powerful ability, especially if you combine it with something like Sovereign Pilot or Yesha, just, general, just kind of what Selesnya likes to do. Next, we have Watcher. So generally, I don't make cards for Stan Lee cameos, but this one is kind of a big one, so I thought I'd make it. It's a 3-cost blue and black legendary creature Elder 2/2 with Companion, everyone's least favorite mechanic, but I think it made a lot of sense. The Watchers are always there. Because of the new change, it's not that bad. It says so the Companion requirement is that each non-land permanent in your starting deck has a different mana cost. So this is a very difficult thing to pull off. And then it says each player plays plays with the top card of their library revealed. For each player may cast the top card of their library as long as it's a permanent and they control no permanents that have the same mana cost as the card. So, for example, 2 and a black and 1 and 2 black are different mana costs because it's not converted mana cost. And we've seen wizards do this exact effect. And so basically you can't have 2 cards in your deck that both cost just 1 green, or a green and a colorless, or a generic. So it's a very difficult thing to build around. Maybe you just throw this in your deck and then don't have too many repeats, but it is a very powerful effect. Now note that this is a symmetrical effect, so your opponents also play with the top card of their library revealed, but the idea here is that can also be a good thing. You can see what your opponent is drawing, they can see what you're drawing, but you can also use it as card draw. Obviously they could too, but there's a chance that they have duplicates, and if you meet his companion cost, as long as it's not a land, you're fine. You also can't play lands off the top, so yeah, generally pretty good card. Also, by the way, these spells can have the same mana cost, just so you know. Next we have Yondu, Father of Quill. It's a 5-cost black and red, which is the color of the Ravagers. Legendary creature Ravager, 5/5, and whenever he attacks, you may gain control of target creature with converted mana cost 2 or less until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste until end of turn. And then you can pay 2, and Yondu gains flying until end of turn. This costs 1 less for each creature you control but don't. Okay. Basically, this is obviously references to his Mary Poppins kind of moment, but he, kind of takes Peter as a child, and to show that he was taking all these children, he can take things with small converted mana cost. As a card, it's very powerful. 5/5, potentially flyer for 5 that can gain control of things to get rid of people's blockers and then use them against them is very powerful. But note that since it's when he attacks, you will not be able to swing with the cards you steal, which is completely purposeful. That's why I did it, because it doesn't really make sense for Yondu to be sending the children he just, kidnapped to go fight his battles. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Next we have Tolk. This is just to show you what more Ravagers like to do. It's black and a red for a legendary creature Ravager 3/3, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may sell target non-token artifact you control. I'll talk about that in a second. When it leaves the battlefield, return all creatures you own to your control. So how this works is the first ability, right? Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you sell something. Selling, how it works is you exile so it says non-token artifact. So you exile a non-token artifact you control. Each opponent chooses a number. You may choose an opponent. You create a number of credit tokens equal to whatever player, if you chose Jim and he said 4, you get to create 4 treasures, or 4 credits, sorry. And then they, the thing you exiled enters the battlefield under their control. But what's interesting about him is when he dies, return all creatures you own to your control. So if you give them artifact creatures, so this is a very tiny little synergy here, you can have basically sell that to him and then steal it back, which is kind of cool. What unit tokens are, I don't know if I said credit, it's unit tokens. They can tap for colorless, or you can tap and sack for colorless, and they can also generate colored mana as well by using multiple of them. So very interesting there. Next, we have Ego's expansion. Now, this is a saga, and it's kind of weird because it's legendary, but it's a very powerful effect, and so I felt like it deserves to be legendary. So it's 5 red, and it says exile target creature you control until it leaves the battlefield. So it's already kind of just a downside from the beginning, unless you can somehow give this thing like flash, and then you can use it to save your creatures. But yeah, so you're gonna exile something of yours when it enters the battlefield. Then at the beginning of your next basically pre-combat main phase, you create a copy of the exiled creature. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So kind of like Ego's going out, making little copies and sacrificing himself. And then you can create 2 copies of the exiled creature, except that they lose legendary, so you can have copies of like Ego. They gain haste, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Now, because it says until this thing leaves the battlefield, that last turn, you will have the original creature entering the battlefield not with haste, and then 2 copies of that creature that aren't legendary that do have haste. And then you'll sack those at the beginning of the next end step. So you're basically temporarily cloning them, and it's a very powerful effect, and it would be kind of devastating to have multiple of these. So I think it's fair to give it legendary. Next, we have the Destruction of Ego. It's a 5-cost black and green enchantment saga. So this one isn't legendary, and it says remove all counters from all creatures and land. So that's just a devastating 5 cost. Just poof, all your land things are gone, which means he loses indestructible and all that. Then you can put a death touch counter on target creature you control, and then target creature you control fights target creature you don't. So if this goes off and they have you go on the other side, you're gonna make him lose indestructible and death touch. You're gonna give something yours death touch, and then you're gonna make them fight. And because it has death touch, Ego will die. It is a very long process, and if they manage to get a counter on a land they control, they can kind of stop this card. But it just has nice utility, especially with that first little ability. So that's it for all the cards I'm going to talk about today. There are a ton of fun ones. You guys should check them out. They're kind of scrolling across the screen now. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Check out all the cards. And this is pretty exciting. We're close to, coming up on some of the really big movies in the MCU. I hope you guys are excited. If you enjoyed, please hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.